There is over in 2 Kings a rather curious incident that took place. So curious, in fact, that one might even wonder why it's in the Bible. It begins with verse 1 of 2 Kings chapter 6. And the sons of the prophet said to Elisha, Behold, now the place where we live is too small. Let's go, we pray you, to Jordan, and take thence every man a beam, and let's make us a place there where we may dwell. And he said, Go, do it. And one said, Well, be content, I pray you, and go with your servants. No, we don't want you to stay behind. We'd like to have you with us. And he answered, I will go. So he went with them, and when they came down to Jordan, they cut down wood. But as one was felling a beam, the axe head fell into the water, and he cried and said, Alas, master, for it was borrowed. And the man of God said, Where did it fall? And he showed him the place, and he cut down a stick and cast it in thither, and the iron did swim. And he said, Take it up to you. And he put out his hand, and he took it. It's a curious situation, or a curious incident to me, because in the first place, it's been a long, long time since I've chopped wood. Long time since I cut down a tree with an axe. Everybody uses chainsaws nowadays. But a chainsaw is hardly less dangerous a weapon than an axe. And I can distinctly remember, even as a boy, when I was learning how to swing one of those things, being very much warned to pay attention to where people were around me. Realizing that on backswing you could hit someone, how easy it is for an axe head to come off. It is a very easy thing to have happen. I can remember distinctly being shown how to drive those little wedges into the top of the axe handle to be sure that the axe head was firmly in place. I can remember starting to use one that was loose and wiggling on the shaft and getting chewed out for it and corrected and saying, you don't do that. I remember hearing of an incident where an axe head flew off on the backstroke where a man hit another man, flew loose in the air, hit a man in the head and killed him dead, right on the spot. So I have to realize that any axe man ought to know that an axe head is a dangerous item, and having it fly off the handle of an axe is as the result of negligence on the part of the axe man, in some measure, some degree. Now, having said that, I have to say to myself, all right, here this man lost the head off of a borrowed axe. He was very concerned about that because of the obligation and the responsibility for borrowed tools. You could think to yourself, well, perhaps the best thing that could happen to this man is that he have to pay the penalty for his negligence or his carelessness. That he have to go work and buy the man another axe head, a brand new one, that he restore the man's tool exactly as it was, and that he learn his lesson. This is such a small, small thing. Indeed, it was a small miracle. And yet, when he came to Elijah cut the stick and put it into the water, but we all know the stick really had nothing to do with it. That it was a miracle that God Almighty decided to save that axe head for that man. A very, very small miracle. Why did he do it? Whenever you think about it, you have to realize at any given moment in time in the world there are myriad, great miracles waiting to be done, needing to be done, desperately needed. There are people who are falsely imprisoned who are praying to be released. A big miracle for them. There are people who are dying of grievous diseases who are praying for healing, that the cancer would be healed, that a tumor would disappear, that their blind eyes might be restored to sight again. These are major miracles. There have been at times in history people who are imprisoned and heading toward gas chambers by the thousands, by the hundreds of thousands, and by the millions who are praying for some kind of deliverance. And with all the miracles that God has out there that He might do at any given point in time, He rescues an axe head for a man. Or He helps you find something that you had lost and that you wanted to find again. It may have been your credit cards. It may have been a wallet with money in it. It may have been a pair of glasses that you just really couldn't afford to replace. Any number of, if I were to ask you, I think every one of you here have had in your lifetime many small miracles. And when you think about it, while you were receiving that small answer to prayer, how many huge miracles went unperformed? Didn't happen. Why do you suppose that type of thing happens? And why would God bother with a small miracle? I think back to Jesus, who was attended a wedding in Cana. And the wedding is carrying on, everybody is enjoying themselves, but all of a sudden they ran out of wine. Whose fault was that? Who arranged it? Why not let them learn the lesson? Why not just say, well, next time you had better have more wine here? But Jesus' mother came to him and says, they run out of wine. He said, woman, what have I to do with you? And I don't know what he meant by that exactly, but then he said, have them bring me some water pots. And you all know what happened. They had these large water pots, giant water pots. They filled them all up with water. And then he said, I want you to take that, dip in there, take it, and deliver it to the governor of the feast. And when they did, it was water that had been made into wine of superb quality. It was just a small miracle. It was really unnecessary. Nobody would have really been seriously hurt. In fact, there probably would have been some people that would have gone home sober who actually went home drunk if that miracle had not been performed. Just a small miracle. And there was a time when Elijah, at the time of a great famine in Israel, had gone up north and found a widow there, and he asked her if she had anything to eat and asked her for some bread. And she said, well, all I have here is just this little measure of meal and a little measure of oil, and I was going to prepare that for my son and myself, and after that, we were going to die. And Elijah said, first, prepare me a very small portion, then prepare for you and your son, because God promises you that the barrel of meal will not fail, and the cruse of oil will not fail, until this famine is over. When it did, she was told. And day after day after day, a very small miracle took place in the bottom of that barrel and in that cruse of oil, because every time she went back, there was enough. Just enough for the family. Why does God do that sort of thing? And why these tiny little, insignificant almost, miracles that take place from time to time? I think sometimes we may not understand God as well as we think we do. If you turn back to the 10th chapter of Matthew, to a rather familiar and rather interesting scripture with some pretty far-reaching consequences when you think about it. Matthew, the 10th chapter, and we'll begin reading in verse 28. And fear not them which kill the body, but are not able to kill the soul, but rather fear him that is able to destroy both soul and body in hell. Are not 2 sparrows sold for a farthing, and not one of them shall fall on the ground without your Father? Now that boggles the mind. How many sparrows are there in this world? You realize that God knows to the last sparrow how many sparrows there are in this world, and not one of those sparrows falls to the ground without it having been taken note of? It's kind of, again, I search for words. I'm speechless almost when I try to comprehend what that means. The incredible capacity for detail and awareness of small things on God's part. The detail part you even stumble at almost when you're told in the Psalms that God numbers all the stars of the heaven and calls them all by name. Astronomers haven't even gotten through with them yet, and they've given up on names. They number actually they number galaxies. They can't deal with the stars inside of them in many cases. There are too many. There are too many galaxies for us to call by name, and in each galaxy there are billions of stars. God, we're told, calls them all by name. And if that were not enough, he says in verse 30, but the very hairs of your head are numbered. I mean, how many are there? I mean, what has to be counted? But the fact is, on you, there you sit, right there in your chair, Almighty God of heaven knows the number of hairs in your head and is aware that it was different from the number that were there yesterday. Larry has come up with a new theory regarding that. Regarding baldness, he has concluded that the reason why we have to keep on losing hair in our life is that the numbers of hair are numbered. And we've got to have hair for all these new children being born in the world, and some of us have to give some up. I'll let him defend his theory to all of you, but it is new theory, at least. The hairs, though, on your head are numbered. Now, exactly what all that means I can't tell you, but I can tell you this. It does mean that there is an awareness in God of the tiniest details of your life, which also would include the smallest needs, the simplest things that you want, the things that are important to you, the things that can change your life, the things that can make it better, the things that can make it worse, and that he can take care of the very smallest details that you have to face day by day. Is it wrong, for example, if you have a dog that's sick, to pray for God to heal it? We might get a difference of opinion on that, mightn't we, along the way, but why not? Why not? That dog is important to you. And if God knows the number of sparrows that there are, does he not know that your dog is sick? Does he not know that your dog is lost? And that you wonder where it is? And does he not know where it is at any given moment in time? And do you suppose that if he's willing to make an axe head swim, that he might be willing to help someone who loves a pet find that pet? That doesn't disturb my thoughts at all, although there's a tendency, and I have had this tendency at times, to think, well, these things are too small to bother God with. It's my fault. I'll just suffer through it. I'll just endure it, or I'll work a little harder to get out of it, or I'll pay it back, or I'll do this, and I'll do the other thing, and all this time I'm thinking in terms of what I'm going to do, instead of taking sometimes the very simple step of going to God and asking him for a small miracle. Not a big miracle, just a small miracle, a little thing, to find my wallet that I've misplaced or my credit cards, to find your scissors, to find your glasses, to find your pet, your cat, your dog, or whatever else it may be, or that God might make your poor sick dog get better. Yeah, we can pray about those things. They are small miracles because it says, after all, the hairs of your head are numbered, and even the sparrows of one of them does not fall to the earth without your Father knowing that it has happened. Now turn a few pages back in Matthew to the 21st chapter. I want us to understand another aspect of this. Matthew chapter 21 and verse 17. And he left them, and he went out of the city to Bethany, and he lodged there. Now in the morning as he returned into the city, he was hungry. And he saw a fig tree in the way, and coming to it, he found nothing on it but leaves. It was all show, no fruit. He actually apparently walked a little ways out of his way to see if there was some fruit on the fig tree. He was hungry. And he said to it, let no fruit grow on you henceforth forever. And presently the fig tree withered away. Very small miracle. And yet, if indeed a miracle can be small. But he said, and when the disciples saw it, they marveled, saying, look how soon this fig tree has withered away. Actually, another gospel account indicates that it might have been from morning until evening that it took. Jesus answered and said to them, verily I say unto you, if you have faith, and you don't doubt, you shall not only do this which is done to the fig tree, but also if you shall say to this mountain, be you removed, and be you cast into the sea, it shall be done. And all things, whatever you ask in prayer, believing, it shall be done. Now, when I read that, I have to look at the statement and say, okay, that's a pretty comprehensive statement. All things that I ask for in prayer, believing, will be done. Then I think in terms of all the things that I have asked for in prayer that have not been done. And I have to face up to the question of my own faith or my own belief, and do I really believe? Now, I can find plenty of excuses why it might not have been done. Well, I needed to learn a lesson from that. And while God heard my prayer, he decided that he would not answer the prayer because I needed to endure or suffer or do without or sacrifice in order to learn certain lessons, and therefore it was important, and I will accept God's will in this regard, and I will go on down my way. And yet, it's entirely possible that God really had no particular interest in what lesson I was going to learn from it. I just really didn't believe that he was going to do it. That's another possibility that I have to allow into my mind. That the reason I didn't get the answer to it was because I didn't believe. Now, I have prayed And I have had answers to prayer. I have never yet plucked up a tree by the roots because of my faith. I have never yet moved a mountain because of my faith. Have any of you? And yet, we have had small miracles. Why not a big one? Why not move a mountain? Why not pluck a tree up by the roots? Well, I don't really believe that if I step outside this door here and I say to one of these pine trees, be plucked up by the roots, I don't believe it's going to happen. I have a lot of reasons why I don't believe it's going to happen. One is it would be a useless miracle. It would be just for show. I would be accomplishing nothing by it, and there would be nothing important to be taking place, and I don't think that Jesus expected us to be going out plucking up trees by the roots or moving mountains around willy-nilly from one place to another. That might be important in the scheme of things, and so I will say I'm not going to do that. But of course, I have to own up to the fact that that isn't really what Jesus was talking about. He used trees and he used mountains as illustrations. But there is a contrast between a very simple thing about praying or making a statement to a fig tree and having it wither up, on the one hand, and doing something highly significant or very important on the other hand. Now, let's think about it for a moment. Do you suppose it is easier for me to believe in prayer that if I pray that God would give some sign of encouragement, some outward sign of encouragement to a person who is suffering from a malignancy or a cancer in his body, is it easier for me to believe that God would do that than it is for me to believe that God will just heal them that cancer and pick them up out of that bed and walk them out of the hospital room? Probably. Probably it is. Because there's something there is a degree in our minds, perhaps not in God's, of the difficulty of miracles, or the all-sweeping nature of miracles, or the things that God might do. And to pray, here's a person who the doctors have all pronounced him nearly dead, have said he's got 3 months to live, there isn't any way he's going to survive, the cancer is all the way through here, and it's there, and it's here, and the other place, and so forth, and you go to God in prayer, and you say, Father, heal him from the top of his head to the bottom of his feet, get rid of every cancer cell in his body, heal him, put him back with his family, back to work, and back at life. Hard to believe that, somehow, because of all the complications, perhaps, of our world, of our experiences, our lack of faith. And yet, to be able to pray something as simple as, Father, see to it that he has a doctor that is sympathetic and understanding. I can find my way even more easily into a firm request like that than into the firm, believing request that God will pick him up out of the bed and help him to walk out of there. These are interesting matters of faith. And the fact is that we do find it easier to believe about some things than we find it easy to believe about others. However it may work in your life, that fact is still there. Now, if you'll turn back a little ways further to the 9th chapter of the book of Mark. Mark chapter 9, and we begin in verse 14. When he came to his disciples, he saw a great multitude around them, and the scribes were questioning him. And straightway all the people, when they saw Jesus, they were amazed, and they ran over to him. The whole mob runs up to Jesus and addressed him. And he asked the scribes, saying, What were you questioning with them? And one of the multitude gathered around and said, Master, I have brought you my son, who has a dumb spirit. And wherever he takes him, he tears him, and he foams, and he gnashes with his teeth, and he pines away. And I spoke to your disciples that they should cast him out, and they could not do it. He answered him and said, O faithless generation, how long am I going to be with you? How long am I going to suffer you? And they brought him to him, and when he saw him, straightway the spirit tore him, and he fell on the ground and wallowed, foaming. He asked his father, How long has he been this way? He said, Since he was a child. And oftentimes it has cast him into the fire and into the waters to destroy him. But if you can do anything, have compassion on us and help him. Now that in itself is interesting. I will tell you of my own experiences in this regard. There is something about a situation where a person is in unusual suffering that generates compassion in all of us. It can be a situation as the one I encountered once upon a time when a woman had injured herself. She had a brand new baby, a little bitty baby. She had hurt herself and her back had been injured somehow, I don't know, picking up something. And she had so much pain she could not raise her arms any higher than this, and she could not carry any weight in her arms at all. If she so much as picked up even a bottle of milk, the pain was more than she could handle. She could not hold this brand new baby to nurse it. Now, there was something about that generated an enormous amount of pity in me, and a great welling feeling of compassion as I thought to myself, this is not right. This is something that God will care about. This is something that God will do. And for some reason, my own compassion and my own pity led me to believe that God would share that compassion and would share that pity, and He would do something about that. And I prayed believing that God would. And when we got up off the floor from kneeling and praying for her, she raised both hands straight up over her head and said the pain was gone. And she could then hold something in her arm or pick up something, and the pain was not there. I have prayed for so many people in my life and my ministry. People have come to me in prayer, and people have had this request or that request. And people have had answers to prayer, and people have not. There have been people who were healed, and there were people who carried on in their sickness and their disease. And I hearken back on that incident in particular because it was one of the points in my life where I was so aware and so believing. And one of the reasons I believed was because of compassion. It is interesting that we find in many circumstances where it says that Jesus was moved with compassion. And out of that movement of compassion in Him, people were healed. And here's a situation where what this is happening to this child. At the time he was a little child, this demon had possessed him, and at times it would throw him into the fire, and sometimes it would throw him in the water, trying its best to destroy this poor child. That would move anyone, I would think, to compassion. But Jesus, he basically said, if you can do anything, have compassion on us and help us. In verse 23, Jesus said to him, if you can believe, all things are possible to him who believes. Now, I'm not going to equivocate on that statement for you. I'm not going to apologize for it. I'm not going to explain it away or anything of the sort. Jesus said it, and there it is. It says, if you can believe, all things are possible to him that believes. But it's not so easy to believe. And it's not something you can just work up inside of yourself or come to because you want it to be there. You don't believe because you want to believe. This poor man cried out and said with tears running down his face, Lord, I believe. Help my unbelief. There was a starting point, owning up to the fact that he didn't believe. Owning up to the fact that he believed part of the way and didn't believe all the way. He couldn't help himself. He was doing all he could, and it was his child. He wanted to believe with all of his heart. And Jesus did help his unbelief. When Jesus saw the people running together, he rebuked the foul spirit, saying to him, you dumb and deaf spirit, I charge you, come out of him and enter no more into him. And the spirit cried and tore him and came out of him, and he lay on the ground like a dead person, and people thought he was dead. And Jesus took him by the hand and lifted him up, and he arose. And when he came to the house with his disciples, they asked him privately, why could we not cast him out? Jesus said, this kind can not come forth by nothing but by prayer and by fasting. Now, I'm not sure exactly how to take that statement that Jesus made there. For one thing, in many of the ancient manuscripts of Matthew, it is not even there. And in many of the ancient manuscripts of Mark, the word fasting is mentioned. So I'm not going to try to explain altogether what that means. I do not believe that you and I, by fasting and prayer, can earn faith somehow and accomplish the fact that we can, by means of our prayer and our fasting, we can then get the demon out, because that involves something that we're doing by works, which really depends on the power of God. But nevertheless, it's important for us to understand that these men had cast out demons before. This time, they could not. There was something particularly difficult. This was a more difficult thing to do than certain other demons were to cast out. It required a greater belief. It required a faith that they didn't have, even though they had faith for smaller miracles. Now, what all that might mean and what all the implications of it are, I'm not going to try to even discuss today. It get involved in some theological and philosophical discussions that could go on endlessly. All I want you to understand from this is that there are some miracles that we will have faith for and can believe for, and others that it's much more difficult for us to believe. It almost boils down to the fact that in some ways for you and I, it is easier and more likely for us to find the small miracle than it is to find the big miracle, whatever the difference between those two might be. Yet, we cannot ignore the importance of belief. In chapter 11 of Mark, and verse 22, Jesus said, Verily I say unto you that whosoever shall say to this mountain, Be removed and cast into the sea, and shall not doubt in his heart, but shall believe that those things he has said will come to pass, he will have whatever he says. Therefore I say unto you, what things soever you desire, when you pray, believe you shall have them, and you shall have them. Now, just a few pages back in Matthew again, there's another side to this that we should notice. Matthew the 13th chapter, and verse 53. It came to pass that when Jesus had finished these parables, he departed there, and he was coming to his own country. He taught in their synagogue insomuch that they were astonished, and they said, Whence has this man this wisdom and these mighty works? Is not this the carpenter's son? Is not his mother called Mary, and his brethren James, and Joseph, and Simon, and Judas, and his sisters are all right here? Why he is just one of them, why should he have all these things? Now, it's a very simple equation here. You sit down and you apply your mind to this. Now, my mind tells me that there's his brother, and there's another one of his brother, there's his mother back there, and here are his sisters sitting over here. He's one of us. He was a carpenter and a carpenter's son. He grew up among here. I've known him since he was a boy. What makes him so special? And all these things that they reasoned their way to brought them not one step closer to belief. In fact, it would seem that it took them a lot further away from belief. That things, that circumstances, that reason, that rationale, explanations don't move you to belief. They said they were basically offended at him. But Jesus said to them, A prophet is not without honor save in his own country, in his own house. And he did not many mighty works there because of their unbelief. Was it a decision? Actually, one of the accounts seems to say that he could not do mighty works in an area because of the unbelief of people. I think we need to understand, in a way that we may not have understood, the importance of small miracles as they relate to our belief. In Luke the 16th chapter, and beginning in verse 10, He that is faithful in that which is least is faithful also in much. He that is unjust in that which is least is unjust also in much. Isn't that an interesting concept? He expects us to be honest in our dealings with one another, because if we will lie to one another in little things, we will lie when it comes to big things, right? Sure we will. If we'll steal a small thing from an employer, the time will come, if it suits us, if we need it, we might very well steal a big thing from our employer. He who is faithful in that which is least is also faithful in that which is much. I think also we might even go beyond that to realize that a man who is able to believe in small things can come to believe in larger things. Take, for example, the Lord's Prayer. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven, and so on. What do you ask for in this prayer? You say, Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us of our sins, as we forgive those who sin against us. You know, in a way, giving you your daily bread is a very small miracle. It is such a small miracle, in fact, that most of you really do not think of it as a miracle at all. You have total confidence that there will be food on the table for you somewhere tonight, don't you? You do believe that? You don't have any trouble believing that, do you? In fact, You are able to believe that your food will be there when you have not even thought to pray for it and to say to God, give us this day our daily bread. But Jesus, in the model prayer, says, simple things that you need in your day in and day out life, you should ask God for. And in the process of asking Him for them, what are you doing? You are acknowledging Him as the source of those things. And you begin to come to realize that God's work is there every day, every way, every part of your life. When your children come home at night from school, it is a small miracle. For don't you pray that God would keep them safe? And don't you realize how many children there are who have not come home from school and have never been seen by their families again in our world? You think it's a smart thing maybe, or a wise thing to say, Father, bring my children home safe? It's a small miracle, but it's a miracle, just like your daily bread. There are so many little things that you can ask for, day in and day out. And you don't ask for them sometimes, so you don't have them. Or you don't ask for them and you assume that you're the one who's getting them, whereas God is actually the one who is making it possible for you to get the things that you have and the things that you do. There are so many things, like when Israel came out of Egypt and they crossed dry shod across the bottom of the Red Sea, they went on up to enter into the Promised Land, and you were familiar with the story, how they came up to it and they had to make a decision. The spies came back and told them, well, we were like grasshoppers. There are giants in the land. And they were afraid. They would not believe God. And so they rebelled and wouldn't go in the land. And God said, okay, not one of you people is going to get to enter. You're going to wander around for 40 years in the desert. Well, they'd been wandering out there for about a year one day, when one of the fellows was looking down at his feet, or sat down on a rock and picked up his sandal and looked at the bottom of it and looked around, took it off his foot and looked at it strangely. He said, you know, I have never had a shoe wear this long. And someone else said, well, you know, I haven't either. And he looked at his. They began to notice. 6 more months went by, and he sat down and took his shoes off, and they still hadn't worn out. 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. Apparently, if we're to understand the account in the Bible, in 40 years of wilderness wandering, their shoes did not get old on their feet. A very small miracle. They could have made more shoes, but God did not leave them without some measure of encouragement, awareness of Him, of His willingness to help them at the bottom level of their life. The thing that separated between their feet and the ground didn't wear out. All that period of time, just a small miracle. I don't know if you read the story in this week's Time magazine about the Chinese lady who was captured by and imprisoned by the Red Guards during the Maoist revolution in China. I won't tell you the whole story about how she was tortured and kept in prison, but there was a day when she was sitting in total depression in this little dank little cell of hers, when a spider went crawling up the wall. And she said she watched it for a while, and it attached itself, and it came down on a long spindle of a thread of its web, and it attached that to the wall, and it went back up, and then it stuck another one on. And she sat there for the longest and proceeded to watch while this spider spun this absolutely perfect web in the corner of her cell. And she wondered to herself, could that have evolved that way? Or did God put it in this little spider to create this perfect and beautiful web? And she found a friendship with the spider. She found encouragement. She found an awareness of God by the presence of nothing more than a small, and you know, when you think about it, a spider web is just that. It is a small miracle. Who taught that spider to do that? God is here. God is aware. God knows. That spider did not die without God knowing that it was dead. She found tremendous encouragement and strength and awareness in that. You know, there is a statement in the law about the responsibilities of the priest in offering up incense before God. They would actually go in, and they would have placed, they had coals put on a little altar, a little cup, And they actually put incense on this altar that smoke went up. We are told that incense and the smoke going up from the incense is symbolic of the prayers of the saints. Rather beautiful little illustration, and the priest did this ceremony. The New Testament writers talk about the incense of our prayers going up before God. But there's an interesting thing about that, sometimes overlooked by people in the ceremony. The priest was not merely to take great chunks of incense and put them on that fire. He was to put the incense in a pestle. He was to take a mortar and slam it in there. Actually, I don't know which is the mortar and which is the pestle, but I mean the mortar is what he puts it in. The pestle is put in to crush it. And he was to beat it up very, very fine, little bitty pieces. And these little bitty pieces were to be put on the coals, which of course made more smoke and more odor that went up. Does that tell you anything? Any lesson to be learned from that about prayer? Because you see, most of us pray in chunks. We sort of gather all our miracles up in one thing, and we say, well, God, heal him of cancer. That's big chunk. But you know, sometimes what may be needful for this person who is in hospital and sick right now may be that someone would come in and sit down and talk to him for a while. It may be the most important thing that could happen to him. God knows that he's sick. God has heard his prayer to be healed of the cancer. But what he needs now, what he needs at this moment of time, is someone who cares enough to sit down and talk to him for a few minutes and help him to get his mind off of it, maybe help him to get certain things in his life in focus for the moment. What he may need right now is to know that somebody cares about him. He may need the phone on the bedside to ring and pick it up and hear the voice of an old friend. You may even be that friend. In fact, you ever think about the fact that it occurred to God, and all of a sudden you say, hey, I have got to, John is in the hospital, I had better get something for him. You hospital, and you put it down there, and you say, how are you? And you sit and you talk to him about how you're really feeling so good. It may never have crossed your mind that the reason you were there was because someone else had prayed that you would be there, and that you yourself were a small miracle. Small answer to prayer. Someone who couldn't be there said, Father, send him some encouragement. Send him somebody that will help lift him out of his discouragement and his despair and get his mind on better things again. He needs that right now while he's waiting on you to heal him. Now that is a really small miracle. And yet, you can pray for it, and you can even be the answer to it in certain cases. And it really makes you wonder sometimes how often you have answered prayers yourself and had no idea that that's what you were, that you were actually a small miracle sent by God to do something that someone else had asked to be done. Sure. You know, I got to thinking about this further. And it began, certain things I've often wondered about, being a thinking person. I've often wondered, what difference does it make if 40 people pray for this person, or 1, or 2, or 3? Why is it necessary for us to, let's say, spread the word of someone who needs prayer all over the world as we have done this afternoon, as we read onto the tape program, and by the time the next week and the week after has come by, there'll be some 2,000 people around the country who have heard this prayer request for this child. And then many of them, hopefully most of them, will find time to pray for this child in the course of the weeks that come. Why is that important? Is it not enough that his mother and father and maybe a minister or two or a deacon or just the people in the local church have prayed for him? Haven't we not solved it? Haven't we handled it? Isn't God aware of it? Is there more to be asked for? Well, when you understand perhaps that big miracles may be composed of a whole lot of small miracles, and that the small miracle that you asked for may not be the small miracle that I asked for, then maybe a lot of us asking for a lot of small miracles may be what goes to make up a big miracle. I don't know. It's just something to think about. That God works in mysterious ways and strange ways, and there are some things that we do know about prayer. We know that intercessory prayer is important. We know that it's important for a group of people to pray for someone who is sick, or someone who is in trouble, or someone who is in jail, as was happened, as they gathered together and pray for Peter and pray for the others. That group prayer and collective prayer and the prayer of many people was sought earnestly and seriously by people because they believed that more people praying about something really did make a difference. It's easy to rationalize yourself into thinking, God knows about it. I've prayed about it once. I've prayed about it twice. I've prayed about it 3 times. There's no point in bugging God about this. There's no point in badgering God over time. And yet, Jesus tells us, categorically, giving us 2 separate parables so that we might know that men ought always to pray and not to quit. The parable of the unjust judge and the parable of the importunate friend. So he says, even though he wouldn't get up and give it to him because he was his friend, he gave it to him because he kept on asking. And for a lot of us, really what we need to be doing is asking for the small miracles day in and day out, because we can believe at that level. And I can't help but think that the answer to a lot of small miracles prayed for would make an enormous amount of difference in my belief when the time comes for me to ask for a big miracle. Do you suppose that there even might be almost like a training, almost like a development, almost like a faith-growing experience to have an answer to a small prayer? Back in Proverbs, there is a little short passage that you can actually make note of, mark in your Bible, and make it a way of life for yourself. We read in Proverbs chapter 3, in verse 5, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and don't depend on your own understanding." You got it all figured out, just like those Jews had figured out that Jesus was brought up there, and he was a carpenter's son. And we know him, and here are his sisters, and here are his brothers. I got it all figured out. I know who he is. I know what he's on about. No. He said, don't lean to your own understanding. Don't think you're going to be able to figure all this stuff out. In all your ways, acknowledge him, and he shall direct your paths. In your big ways, and the important things, and the things that make the big difference in your life. Now, that's what you're really supposed to go to God about. Don't bother God about little things. Larry and I, as you mentioned earlier, went down to Buffalo this year, as we often do. We put our flat-bottom riverboat in, and we spent 3 days floating down the river. And I thought, it would be nice if it doesn't rain on us at all in this period of time. My problem is that if I pray God don't have it rain on us for these 3 days, maybe there are people around me who need rain. And I have to keep that in my consciousness as I pray. It would be selfish of me to pray just that Larry and I would be able to have our trip down the river, and that there would be no rain on our little bogs as we made it down the river, that there may be other overriding considerations, and I have to pray about that, and I have to say to God, well, if it be your will, let that happen. But in the process of acknowledging God as we start off down a river trip like that, being aware of him, of asking him to take care of us, being concerned about whether we got wet or not, supposing he did decide it was time for a couple of good lines of thunderstorms to come across because the area was dry and the river was going to flood and come up. By acknowledging him, my small miracle may not be that it will not rain during that period of time. My small miracle may be that Larry and I decided that it was interesting to go poking up a creek. And then we were way up the top of that creek when the flash flood went roaring by the mouth of that creek on the Buffalo River later in the day. That might be my small miracle. You see, it doesn't say that you will always get everything you ask for. It says, in all your ways acknowledge him, and he will direct your paths. Maybe we need to give a little more thought to the small miracle.